The Bristol Freighter, not so much an aircraft as a warehouse with wings. For 35 years, the skyborne packing case laughed at the laws of gravity and aerodynamics to deliver freight all over New Zealand. Those doors could swallow everything from cars to livestock and waft them into the air with all the grace of a Bulgarian weightlifter. The rolling thunder of her passage through the sky was as familiar to Wellingtonians as the wind itself. She wasn't a thing of beauty, but she was robust. The inner workings were more humdrum than high-tech. But you don't need high-tech to deliver the goods, as Straits Air Freight Express or Safe Air found over 2 generations. She was used for everything from rescuing stranded Cook Strait ferry passengers to moving herds of stud cattle, or as a giant removal van, shifting people's entire household furniture around the country. No task ever seemed too great.
Lovely day. Hope so. Got an aeroplane? Yes, we've got one there.
For the younger crew members, to fly her was to participate in a long tradition. For the old hands, she was loaded full of memories.
Still rolling up to the north there.
With all that gold braid, you might have thought the crew were about to fly off in a Concorde. But somehow, perhaps not.
We have to wait here a while, but we'll have a look around it anyway. Okay, fine.
Over the years, Safe Air's pilots made hundreds of thousands of accident-free flights in the Bristol, but there's something about those brick outhouse looks that might make a chap wonder if it'd really get off the ground. Anyway, when you're planning to wrestle nearly 20 tons of plane and cargo into the air, you like to be doubly sure.
Please be over 26 runway 071014.
To lift one brute, it took 2 others, each growling and grumbling with 2,000 bad-tempered horsepower. They were not nice to be near.
Stood. Generators are charging.
A 2,000 horsepower engine can take some starting, but you've got to forgive an old lady for being grumpy sometimes. With this sort of machinery bolted to the wing just meters from your head, a standard communications headset would be useless. You wouldn't even be able to hear yourself think. The pilots wore specially converted earmuffs instead.
284 up top, autopilot.
282 set, uncaged, let off.
Back in.
Is check 4 and 4 on the changeover.
The cockpit definitely predated the electronic age. The Bristols were built in the 1940s and 50s, but based on earlier Bristol aircraft designed right back in the 1920s. No liquid crystal displays or onboard computers here, Main interior design colour, black.
Wellington and DME on Blenheim. Okay, thanks, Colin. Cover 26, line up on 07, 040, 12 knots.
36, line up 07.
To the purist, there was no sound quite like the crackling impatience of a Bristol Freighter waddling its way to the runway, or the deep-throated roar as it charged like some medieval battering ram. But not everyone loved the Bristol. Just ask the residents near the airports they used. In 1955, someone was so enraged by the noise that they fired a gun at one. The bullet passed right through the passenger compartment and out the other side. No one was hurt, the planes flew on, and the perpetrator continued to suffer, but not in silence.
Sir Delta Sound 140, contact the Bristol.
Yes, sir, Delta, thanks. Continue approach number 3, follow the Bristol.
Sir Delta number 3.
Once you get onto Bristol, it becomes a sort of a love affair. They're such a docile aircraft. Nowadays they've got automatic pilots in them and they're a bit heavier on the controls than they were before when we had no autopilot, naturally. They respond well. They behave well in turbulence. As you well know, they nearly always seem to get into Wellington without too much trouble, but you're working pretty hard, but you can get in there, and they do respond very well to the controls. Lose a motor. It carries on depending on the weight, of course, but I've never had any troubles at all, and I've lost many motors over the years. And it gets you there, so you get a great amount of faith in the aircraft. And as the years go by, you become a happy person because you find that you're flying an aircraft that you've got some faith in, and although it's got all sorts of little things that go wrong, in the main, it'll always keep on keeping on, as the saying is. And it's a lovely airplane to fly. I'll be sorry to see it go.
The Chatham Islands run. To make it almost bearable, Safe Air loaded a noise-reducing passenger capsule into the plane. It gave economy class a whole new meaning. From 1967, the Bristol became the main link with the Chathams. With the following wind, the island would appear off the aircraft's nose about 2¼ hours out of Wellington or Christchurch. pilot would then lower the flaps to ease off some of the terrifying 145 knots of forward momentum that the Bristol had built up on the trip. Hapapu airstrip was pretty much like the Bristol itself, unpretentious and fairly basic, but it did the job, at least most of the time. Occasionally the airstrip would become waterlogged after heavy rain and flights would have to be cancelled. Anyway, there was nobody much around to complain about the noise here. Perhaps it was the psychological impact of the fact that the Bristol had to cover a lot of water to get there. But whatever the reason, the Chatham's flights led to a necessary modification.
We had a spate of food poisoning mainly. We're staying in hotels and there and that, then you get the dose of this food poisoning, and it's not very pleasant when you're sitting in an air and you want to try to get to a toilet or things in a hurry. So after a lot of complaints and things, our worthy engineers designed this contraption we've got here that sits up on the nose doors. Well, one of the advocators of it was one of our pilots, and he was most insistent on it. So having got the thing, he had to try it out. So it was on a flight to the Chathams. So after due respects, he went down, got himself comfortable, and the opposing captain couldn't resist the temptation, called one of our chaps down the cabin attendant down the back, so if he wouldn't mind coming up to the cockpit, he got something there. So he opens the door and displays to the passengers our first officer sitting on our new required new instrument.
The Bristol Freighter was based on a military plane intended mainly for the RAF in Burma. This version was built for civilian use, but in fact, over half the 214 Bristol Freighters built ended up in a military role around the world. The biggest users were the Pakistani and Argentinian Air Forces and the RNZAF, which had 12 in service. The Americans in Vietnam were astounded by this piece of World War II technology. One US airman, seeing the plane for the first time, is said to have asked, "Now, is that the aircraft or the packing case it came in?" You'd expect a plane with all the aerodynamics of a bumblebee would be something of a nightmare to fly, but generations of pilots found otherwise.
When you're doing the training, you're talking, of course, to people who've been flying them before, and of course they all know all, and you don't know anything about it at all, and you're drinking everything they say. And I was led to believe that the store was vicious. Well, coming across the straits back from Paraparaumu to Blenheim on my first ever flight, and Ham was showing me the store. We were about 5,000 feet, a full load of freight, and he said, "Pull the nose back, up, up, up." He says, "Back further." I had the stick right back there, and the throttle's off there. And he said, "That is the stall." It was just going down. It was all nonsense. There was no winged up at all. A very, very docile airplane.
But a danger beyond the control of any pilot caused one Bristol to crash near Christchurch in 1957. Metal fatigue caused the starboard wing to fall off in mid-air, and 4 people died. They included 2 of Safe Air's founders, Ham Hamilton, the operations manager, who'd originally delivered the aircraft to New Zealand, and Tom O'Connell, the company's general manager. The Bristols were grounded, and the wing spars later modified. As a result, the planes then had a remarkably long, fatigue-free life, one of the reasons that kept them in our skies for so many years. Maintenance was done at the workshops near Blenheim. It was here that they kept those mighty engines roaring.
It's a 14-cylinder radial engine, sleeve valve. Sleeve valve being peculiar in itself in that this is the only successful aero engine, to my knowledge, to operate on sleeve valve. Once it's assembled, there's no tappets, no adjustments to make the valve timing. It is fixed from the day it was made. The day it was stripped down for overhaul. That's 3,300 hours. The compression ratio is a lot higher than a lot of aircraft engines. The propeller is 14 foot in diameter, and it takes 2 men on a winter time to turn the propellers over in the cold water, and then they have reduction gear 2 to 1. The problems in the air once they're going is negligible. We have maintenance-wise, say mission problems were probably one of the greatest problems we had. I enjoy working on them because I've worked on them for now nearly 30 years, and one of the advantages of working an aircraft engine so long is you understand it, you know where every piece comes from or should go back on, and there's no hassle. But no, it's a good engine, yes.
Emergency. Yeah.
Bolted to the wing of the Bristol Freighter, the poor old Hercules engine probably never achieved the glamour it deserved. At the speed it could drag a Bristol along, time just seemed to catch up and pass it by. But as the jets flew faster and higher, the Bristols just kept pottering right along. She may have been slow, but she could still beat a ferry across Cook Strait. Somehow it seemed the more old-fashioned the Bristol got, the fonder the pilots became of her. They were fiercely loyal, although they could laugh at her too. Well, with a plane that looks like the Bristol, sometimes you had to laugh, really. Take the undercarriage. It didn't retract, unlike most modern planes. There's the story of a jet pilot rather self-importantly informing the control tower, on final approach, undercarriage down. When it was the turn of the Bristol following, the pilot was able to say, on final approach, undercarriage down and riveted. Whatever her failings, the Bristol sure could carry freight. The value of the Cook Strait service was reflected in the huge numbers of flights she did in and out of Safe Air's bases at Wellington and Blenheim.
There wasn't a day go by that you couldn't see one, if not two, aircraft in our vision here, going past.
Remember our General Manager Des Linsky making the comment that he'd been speaking to some VIP in Wellington, and he asked why the Bristols were doing circuits and bumps in Wellington. That's how often they come in, and as George said, there's always an aircraft in the circuit. It had to be that way, otherwise they wouldn't have fitted through.
Yeah, I think the most returns they did one day was 39. But the thing was that there was one coming in and out every 20 minutes. They were hard up behind one another. And if one went US, they used to have to just push it to one side because you just slowed down the whole process. So the next one just came and took his load and away they went.
We had licenses to operate 4, but we had 5 and 6.
6, that's right.
So with the licensing, you could only have 4 in the air at one time. So we used to have
a spare
on the ground here and a spare on the ground over there, and as the pilots would get out of one into the other, but we found it was impossible to get more than 4 in the air at one time.
Yeah, it was really.
Yeah, by the time you were working on one here, there was 2 going that way, 2 going that way, and the other 2 would be on the ground anyhow.
Plus also the refuelling was always done in Wellington. Yeah, so that here all they had to do was just take the load in and out.
I think it got down to the stage where it was 6 tons out, 6 tons in, and 6 minutes on the chocks.
On the chocks, yeah.
The whole turnaround was down to about 9 minutes on one occasion.
Yeah, that was a record.
That was a record, because we were all trying to beat the record.
Oh dear.
Not all of us.
But we were allowed 20 minutes was the norm, but usually with 15 it'd be ample.
20 minutes was the time the wheels touched the ground till they left the ground.
Yes.
The loading system of pre-packed cargons was essential to the Bristol's success. Before they were introduced, it took an hour and a quarter to load the cavernous space of the cargo hold. and all for a 25-minute flight. Properly loaded, the Bristol could carry 5 tons. Add on fuel and the 13 tons of the plane itself, and getting airborne took, well, just a little bit of time. Bristol's designers made her just fast enough to struggle into the teeth of a good Wellington northerly. She carried her loads with plenty of noise, but little real complaint for 35 years. The thunderous overture of her Hercules engines filling the amphitheatre of Wellington Harbour with a proud resonance. Today, that old roar has been supplanted by the shrill scream of jet engines. They used to call the Bristol 20,000 rivets flying in close formation, but now she flies only in the memory of those who knew her.